I was standing in the marble bathroom on the 40th floor of Sterling and Associates, mascara running down my face, trying to pull myself together before anyone noticed I'd disappeared. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the tissue I was dabbing at my ruined makeup. 67 years old, and I'd let my husband reduce me to this, crying in a corporate bathroom because his words had finally broken through whatever armor I'd built up over 3 decades. Stay silent. Your opinions are worthless. That's what Richard had hissed at me as we walked into the boardroom, his fingers digging into my wrist hard enough to leave marks. Not the first time he'd said it, maybe the 100th, but something about today felt different. Final. I heard the bathroom door open behind me. I didn't even look up, just kept dabbing at my face, hoping whoever it was would leave quickly. But then I heard it. A sharp intake of breath. A whispered word that made my entire world stop. Ellie? No one had called me that in 25 years. No one except... I looked up into the mirror, and I swear to God my heart stopped beating. The man standing behind me was older now, salt and pepper hair, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But I would know that face anywhere. James Hartley, the man I'd loved more than my own life. The man who'd died 3 weeks before our wedding. Except he was standing right there, very much alive, in a $5,000 suit, staring at me like I was the ghost. James? My voice came out barely above a whisper. He moved toward me slowly, like I might vanish if he moved too fast. His eyes were filling with tears. I've been looking for you for 25 years, he said, his voice breaking on the last word. They told me you were dead. Your husband told me you died in the same accident that supposedly killed me. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the sink to steady myself. What? No, Richard said he showed me the death certificate, the newspaper. Forged, James said, and now his hands were on my shoulders, warm and real and impossible. All of it. Eleanor, I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped loving you. Behind us, I heard footsteps in the hallway, Richard's voice, sharp with irritation. Eleanor, where are you? The meeting is starting. James's jaw tightened. That's him? That's the man you married? I nodded, still trying to process what was happening. He said you were gone. He said, "Oh my God, James, what has he done?" We're going to find out, James promised. Because I'm not the man your husband was expecting today. I'm the new CEO, and I've been investigating Sterling and Associates for 6 months. The door opened. Richard's face appeared, and when he saw James holding my hands, the color drained from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Hello, Richard," James said, his voice like ice. "I believe we have some unfinished business. Have you ever discovered that everything you believed was a lie? That the man you trusted had stolen your entire life?" I was about to find out just how deep Richard's betrayal went. But to understand what happened next, I need to take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Eleanor Grace Mitchell, though that wasn't always my name. I was born Eleanor Thornton 67 years ago, and for the first 29 years of my life, I was somebody. I ran my father's investment firm. I closed million-dollar deals. I was engaged to the love of my life. And then, in the space of 3 months, all of that disappeared. But let me start at the beginning. 6 months before that terrible day in the bathroom, I was living in the penthouse Richard and I had bought 15 years ago, all marble and glass and designer furniture that was beautiful but never quite felt like home. My days followed the same pattern they'd followed for decades. I woke up at 6, made Richard's coffee exactly how he liked it, laid out his suit, asked what he wanted for dinner, smiled when he told me my opinion didn't matter. I'd become very good at being invisible. That particular morning in March, Richard came down to breakfast already on his phone, his face tight with stress. "The company's being acquired," he said without looking up. "New CEO is taking over Sterling and Associates. Big meeting in 3 weeks." "Is that good news?" I asked carefully. I'd learned over the years to phrase everything as a question, never an observation. It's complicated, he snapped. Then softer. I need to make the right impression, Eleanor. This is important. Of course, I said. Whatever you need. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for just a second I saw something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or calculation. You'll come to the board meeting, he said. It wasn't a question. Wear the navy dress, the conservative one, and Eleanor, he paused. Stay in the back. Don't draw attention. I nodded and poured him more coffee, my hands steady even though something about his tone made my stomach clench. You see, I hadn't always been this person. Once upon a time, I was Eleanor Thornton, daughter of Harold Thornton, who built Thornton Investments from nothing into one of Chicago's most respected firms. I worked alongside him from the time I was 22, fresh out of business school with a finance degree and something to prove. I was good at it, really good. I could read a balance sheet like poetry and spot a bad investment from across the room. By the time I was 25, I was senior consultant, and Daddy was talking about making me partner. That's when I met James Hartley. He worked for a rival firm, and we met at a conference in New York. He was 27, brilliant, funny, and he looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in the world. We fell in love fast and hard, the kind of love that makes you believe in destiny. We got engaged that Christmas. The wedding was planned for April 15th, and then, 3 weeks before the wedding, Daddy called me into his office. His face was gray, and his hands were shaking. Eleanor, honey, I have some terrible news. James had been killed in a car accident. That's what they told me. Died instantly, they said. I remember Daddy showing me the death certificate, the newspaper clipping. I remember not believing it, calling James's office, his apartment, getting no answer. I remember the funeral I wasn't invited to because his family blamed me for some reason I never understood. And I remember Richard Mitchell, Daddy's junior partner, bringing me tea and tissues and sitting with me while I cried. Daddy got sick 2 months after James died. Cancer, the doctors said, though it came on so suddenly. He went from healthy to dying in a matter of weeks. On his deathbed, he made me promise I'd let Richard take care of things because I shouldn't have to deal with business during grief. I was too broken to argue. Richard proposed 6 months after James died. I said yes because I was drowning and he was offering a life raft. We married quickly, quietly. Daddy died 3 months later, leaving me a $15 million trust fund that Richard promised to manage properly. The first year, Richard was attentive, sweet even. The second year, he was busy. By the 5th year, he was dismissive. By the 10th, every idea I had was stupid, every opinion worthless, every contribution unnecessary. You're not a businesswoman anymore, Eleanor, he'd say with that patient smile. You're my wife. That's what matters. So I became what he wanted. I got my hair done every week at the same salon. I hosted perfect dinner parties with the right wine and the right conversation topics. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, less. I was 67 years old, and I'd disappeared so completely that sometimes I'd catch my reflection and not recognize myself. But something about this acquisition made Richard different. Nervous in a way I'd never seen before. I started noticing things. He was on the phone constantly, always in his study with the door closed. He came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine. Victoria Sterling, his business partner, a woman 15 years younger than me with perfect blonde hair and predatory smiles, started coming by the house for strategy sessions that lasted hours. One night, 2 weeks before the board meeting, I walked past Richard's study and heard him talking. I don't care what you have to do, Marcus, he was saying, his voice low and urgent. Make sure those documents are buried. If Hartley finds them... He stopped mid-sentence. I kept walking, my heart pounding, but the name echoed in my head. Hartley. The next day, I found the board meeting invitation on Richard's desk. The new CEO's name was printed at the bottom. James A. Hartley, Hartley Global Acquisitions. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the card. It couldn't be. My James was dead. I'd seen the obituary, but Richard had used that name on the phone, and now he was terrified. I stood there in Richard's office, sunlight streaming through the windows of our perfect penthouse, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 38 years. Suspicion. I started paying attention. Really paying attention. Richard's late nights at the office became more frequent. I heard him on calls talking about asset protection and offshore accounts. Victoria's visits increased, and the way she touched Richard's arm, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. I wasn't as blind as they thought. One morning, after Richard left for his tennis game, I went into his study. The safe was closed, but his desk drawer wasn't locked. Inside, I found files labeled with my father's company name, Thornton Investments, the company that had been dissolved after Daddy died. Except according to these documents, it hadn't been dissolved. It had been transferred to Richard, using my signature on documents I'd never seen. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought I might faint. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and photographed everything. There were more files. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Transfer records showing systematic withdrawals from my trust fund over 20 years. Emails between Richard and someone named Marcus Webb discussing how to maximize access without triggering oversight. They'd been stealing from me for decades. I was still standing there, papers spread across Richard's desk, when I heard the garage door open. He was home early. I shoved everything back into the drawer and ran to the bedroom, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do with this information? Who could I trust? That night, lying in bed next to the man who'd been systematically destroying me, I made a decision. I was going to find out the truth, all of it, and I was going to that board meeting, even if Richard didn't want me there. Because if James Hartley was alive, if my James was alive and Richard had known all along, then everything I'd believed for 38 years was a lie. Have you ever realized that your entire life was built on someone else's deception? That the person sleeping next to you had stolen everything that mattered? I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal went. The morning after I found those documents, Richard left for work at his usual time. I watched him from the bedroom window as he got into his Mercedes, phone already pressed to his ear, completely unaware that I'd spent the entire night planning my next move. As soon as his car disappeared around the corner, I pulled out my laptop, the one he'd bought me years ago for shopping and recipes, and started searching. James Hartley. My hands were shaking as I typed the name. Part of me was terrified of what I'd find. Part of me was terrified I wouldn't find anything at all. But there he was, CEO of Hartley Global Acquisitions, a multinational firm specializing in corporate takeovers. His photo stared back at me from the screen. Older, yes, with silver at his temples and lines around his eyes, but unmistakably him, my James, alive. I read every article I could find. He'd started the company 20 years ago, after personal tragedy. He was known for being ruthless in exposing corporate fraud, for taking down corrupt executives and sending them to prison. He'd dismantled 6 major companies in the last decade alone, and now he was acquiring Sterling and Associates. I sat there staring at his photo, tears streaming down my face. He was alive. He'd been alive this whole time while I'd mourned him, while I'd married Richard, while I'd let my entire life be stolen from me. The coffee I'd made hours ago had gone cold. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, and I was still sitting there, my mind racing with impossible questions. Had Richard known? Of course he had known. He'd shown me the death certificate, the obituary. He'd held me while I cried. And all along, James had been alive somewhere, and Richard had made sure we'd never find each other. My phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Remember what I said. Silent, invisible, don't embarrass me. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I deleted it and made a call I hadn't made in 15 years. Patricia Chen's office, a professional voice answered. Tell her Eleanor Thornton is calling, I said, using my maiden name for the first time in decades. My voice was steadier than I expected. Tell her it's urgent. Patricia had been my college roommate, Then my colleague at Daddy's firm. She'd gone on to become one of Chicago's top corporate attorneys. We'd lost touch after my marriage. Richard had discouraged old friendships, said they were living in the past, but I was betting she'd remember me. She called back within 5 minutes. "Ellie, my God, is that really you?" Hearing my old nickname again made something crack open in my chest. "Tricia, I need help. I think my husband has been stealing from me for 20 years, and I need to know I'm not crazy." There was a pause, then her voice came back sharp and focused. "Come to my office, now, and bring everything you found." 2 hours later, I was sitting in Patricia's downtown office, watching her face grow darker as she reviewed the photographs I'd taken of Richard's documents. She'd aged well, still had that sharp, no-nonsense energy I remembered, and seeing her made me realize how much I'd missed having someone in my life who treated me like I had a brain. "Eleanor, this is textbook financial abuse," she said finally, looking up from her tablet. "Your husband and his lawyer have been systematically draining your trust fund. These shell companies, they're all controlled by Richard. He's moved at least $8 million offshore. Can we prove it?" My hands were twisted together in my lap. "With these documents? Yes. But Eleanor." She pulled up something on her computer and turned the screen toward me. "I did some digging on James Hartley after you mentioned him. He's been searching for you for 25 years. It was an old missing persons website, archived. My photo from when I was 25 stared back at me, young, smiling, wearing the earrings James had given me for my birthday. The caption read, "Eleanor Grace Thornton, last seen April 15, 1999. Please contact James Hartley with any information." April 15th. 3 weeks after I'd been told James died. The same day I'd agreed to marry Richard. "He thought I was missing?" I whispered. "More than that." Patricia clicked to another page. "He hired private investigators for a decade. He searched hospitals, morgues, everywhere. Then your marriage to Richard showed up in public records, but by then you were using your married name exclusively. Different city, different social circles. You'd effectively disappeared." Richard made sure of it. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. The way he'd insisted we move to a new city for his career opportunities. The way he'd systematically cut me off from everyone who'd known me as Eleanor Thornton. The way he'd slowly, methodically erased who I was and created Eleanor Mitchell, the obedient corporate wife who didn't have opinions. "There's more," Patricia said gently. "James started his acquisition company specifically to target corrupt firms, and Sterling and Associates has been on his radar for 2 years. Ellie, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think he finally found out where Richard works." The room felt too small suddenly. "He's been looking for me this whole time? I think he's been looking for revenge. And you." I went home that afternoon with a plan. Patricia would prepare legal documents, forensic audit requests, account freezes, evidence packages for the SEC. But we needed more. We needed proof that Richard had deliberately faked James's death. We needed evidence of his affair with Victoria. We needed him to confess. That's when I decided to become what Richard thought I was. Invisible. For the next week, I played the perfect wife. I smiled. I cooked his favorite meals. I laid out his suits. I asked about his day and listened to him talk about the challenging transition with the new CEO, never mentioning that I knew exactly who that CEO was. And I watched. I watched Richard make calls he thought I couldn't hear. I watched Victoria come over for business meetings that ended with them in his office for hours, the door locked. I watched him print documents and immediately shred them, not realizing I'd already sent copies to Patricia. One night, 8 days before the board meeting, I heard him on the phone in his study. It was past midnight. I'd pretended to be asleep when he got up, but I'd followed him silently down the hallway. "Marcus, everything needs to be finalized before the acquisition closes," he was saying. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. Desperation mixed with arrogance. "Once Hartley takes over, there'll be audits. We need the remaining funds moved to the offshore accounts by Friday. I was standing in the dark hallway in my nightgown, phone in hand, recording every word. Yes, I know it's risky, Richard continued, but Victoria and I have already planned our exit strategy. Once the money is secure, we'll file for divorce, I'll take my settlement, and we're gone. Eleanor won't even know what hit her. My blood turned to ice, but my hand stayed steady on the phone. She's too stupid to figure it out anyway. Richard laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. I've been managing her for 38 years. She thinks her opinions are worthless because I told her they were. God, it's almost too easy. Her father was the same way, so trusting. Made it simple to handle him. Handle him. Something in the way he said it made every nerve in my body stand at attention. Yeah, well, the old man had to go, Richard said. He was getting suspicious about the company transfers, but a little arsenic in his morning coffee and nature took its course. Doctors never suspected a thing. Too busy looking for cancer. The hallway tilted. I grabbed the wall to keep from falling. My father. Richard had murdered my father. Eleanor was so broken up about it, she signed everything I put in front of her, Richard continued, his voice filled with satisfaction. Power of attorney, account transfers, everything. She never even read them, just cried and signed where I pointed. I stopped the recording and walked back to the bedroom on legs that didn't feel like mine. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to Richard's voice echo in my head, and I felt something I hadn't felt in almost 4 decades. Rage. Pure, cold, clarifying rage. Richard had murdered my father. He'd faked James's death and stolen him from me. He'd systematically drained my inheritance while convincing me I was too stupid to notice. And now he was planning to divorce me, take what was left, and disappear with his mistress. He'd stolen 38 years of my life, and he thought I was too broken to fight back. I forwarded the recording to Patricia with a message. He killed my father. I want him destroyed. Her response came immediately. We'll make sure he pays for everything. I'm contacting the authorities first thing in the morning. The next morning, I put on the navy dress Richard had specified for the board meeting, the conservative, forgettable one. I did my hair and makeup perfectly. I put on my pearls and my wedding ring. And I slipped a small recording device into my purse, along with a USB drive containing copies of every document I'd found. You look appropriate, Richard said when I came downstairs. Not beautiful, not lovely, appropriate. Like a piece of furniture that matched the decor. Thank you, I said with a small smile. In the car on the way to Sterling and Associates, Richard gripped my wrist hard enough to hurt. Remember, Eleanor, stay in the back, silent. Don't embarrass me in front of the new CEO. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for the first time in decades. The handsome face that had comforted me after James's death. The charming smile that had convinced me to marry him. The cold eyes that had never, not once, really seen me. I won't embarrass you, I said quietly. And I meant it. Because what was about to happen wasn't going to be embarrassing. It was going to be devastating. What would you do if you discovered your entire marriage was built on murder and lies? If you found out the man you'd trusted had killed your father, stolen your love, and planned to leave you with nothing? I was about to walk into a room with the man who'd destroyed my life and the man I'd never stopped loving. And I was going to take back everything Richard had stolen. Sterling and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of the Riverside Tower, all glass and steel, and the kind of corporate prestige that Richard had always craved. I'd been there dozens of times over the years for holiday parties and charity galas, always as Richard's silent accessory, smiling on command and fading into the background. But today felt different. Today, I walked through those glass doors with evidence of murder in my purse and a recording device in my pocket. Today, I wasn't Eleanor Mitchell, the obedient corporate wife. Today, I was Eleanor Thornton. And I was done being invisible. Richard's hand was firm on my elbow as we rode the elevator to the 40th floor, guiding me like I couldn't be trusted to walk on my own. He was nervous. I could see it in the way he kept checking his phone, in the muscle jumping in his jaw. Victoria was already there when we arrived, wearing a red dress that was far too revealing for a business meeting and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Richard, darling," she said, air-kissing both his cheeks before turning to me with false warmth. "And Eleanor, how nice of you to come support your husband today." The condescension dripped from every word. She thought I was too stupid to hear it. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said pleasantly, and something in my tone made Victoria's smile falter for just a second. The boardroom was already filling with executives, 20 men and women in expensive suits, all nervous energy and forced small talk. Richard steered me to a chair in the back corner near the door, where I'd be out of sight. "Stay here," he muttered, his lips barely moving. "The CEO arrives at 10. Do not speak unless spoken to. Actually, don't speak at all." I nodded obediently and watched him walk to the front of the room where Victoria was waiting. They stood close together, too close, their heads bent in quiet conversation. I pulled out my phone, angling it to look like I was checking messages, but I was recording. "Are the documents ready?" Victoria was asking in a low voice. "Marcus filed them this morning." Richard's voice was tight with tension. "The audit trail is clean. Hartley won't find anything until after we've moved the rest of Eleanor's trust fund." "What if he does find something?" Richard glanced back at me, but I was staring at my phone with the blank expression I'd perfected over decades. He turned back to Victoria, apparently satisfied. "He won't. The old woman signed everything without reading it. She doesn't even remember half of what she signed." He laughed quietly. God, it was so easy. After her father died, she was so broken she would have signed her own death warrant if I'd asked. "You're terrible," Victoria said, but she was smiling. Her hand touched his arm, lingering. "What about after the divorce? She won't just let you take everything." "She won't have a choice. I've already laid the groundwork with the lawyers, documentation showing she's been making poor financial decisions, forgetting things, showing signs of dementia. By the time we're done, no court will trust her testimony over mine." My hands clenched around my phone, but I kept my face neutral. They thought I couldn't hear them, thought I was just a fixture in the corner, as forgettable as the furniture. "And if she fights?" Victoria pressed. "She won't." Richard's voice was absolutely certain. "I've spent 38 years breaking her down, making her believe she's worthless. She thinks her opinions don't matter because I told her they don't. She's not going to suddenly grow a spine now." Victoria laughed softly, and then, right there, 15 feet from me while 20 executives pretended not to notice, they kissed. Quick and practiced, the kiss of two people who'd done it 1,000 times before. I kept recording, kept my face blank, kept breathing even though I wanted to scream. Richard moved to the head of the conference table and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. As you know, we're about to meet James Hartley, CEO of Hartley Global Acquisitions. This is a significant opportunity for Sterling and Associates, and I expect everyone to present their best face." He shot me another warning glance. I gave him a small, acquiescent smile. "Mr. Hartley has an impressive reputation for corporate restructuring," Richard continued, and I could hear the false confidence in his voice. "But let me be clear. We are not being absorbed. This is a partnership between equals. We have prepared extensive documentation showing that Sterling and Associates is financially sound and ethically managed." Every word was a lie. The company was built on fraud, and Richard knew it. "The acquisition should be finalized within 60 days, Richard said. "At which point I will transition to a senior advisory role, allowing Mr. Hartley to implement his vision while I—" He paused, his eyes finding Victoria. "While I pursue other opportunities. With my money in the Cayman Islands, with his mistress." My phone buzzed quietly. A text from Patricia. "We have agents standing by. Just say the word." I texted back, "Wait until after I talk to James." At 9:58, Richard checked his watch for the 10th time. Victoria touched up her lipstick. Every executive in the room sat up straighter, adjusting ties and smoothing hair, and I felt like I was watching my whole life converge into this single moment. A woman in a sharp suit opened the door. "Mr. Hartley is on his way up." Richard straightened his tie. Victoria smoothed her dress. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I hadn't seen James in 25 years. He thought I was dead, or lost, or, God, I didn't even know. But in 2 minutes, he was going to walk through that door and see me sitting in the corner of this boardroom while my husband pretended I didn't exist. Another buzz from Patricia. "He knows you're there. He's been planning this for months. Let him lead." At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened. James Hartley walked in, and the entire room seemed to hold its breath. He was 52 now, his dark hair silvered at the temples, his shoulders broader than I remembered. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car, and his presence commanded instant attention. But it was his eyes, those same green eyes I'd fallen in love with 27 years ago, that undid me. They were scanning the room, searching. Richard stepped forward, hand extended, his best corporate smile in place. "Mr. Hartley, welcome to Sterling & Associates. I'm Richard Mitchell, managing partner, and this is..." James's eyes found me. Everything stopped. His face went pale. His mouth opened slightly, like he couldn't breathe. "Ellie?" The word came out barely above a whisper, but in the silent room, everyone heard it. 20 heads turned to look at me, sitting in my corner chair in my conservative navy dress. Richard's face went from confused to pale to furious in 3 seconds. "I'm sorry. Do you know my wife?" The possessiveness in those 2 words, "my wife," made my skin crawl. James ignored him completely. He walked past Richard's outstretched hand, past Victoria, past every executive in that room. He walked straight to me like I was the only person in the world. "Ellie," he said again, and his voice cracked. "They told me you were dead." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. I just stared up at him, tears streaming down my face, while my carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. "I searched for you for so long," James said, and now he was crying too. God, Ellie, I thought I'd lost you forever." Richard's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "Mr. Hartley, I don't know what's happening here, but I assure you, there's been some mistake. My wife is Eleanor Mitchell. We've been married for 38 years. James finally looked at Richard, and his expression was pure ice. "Married to Eleanor Thornton, the woman I was engaged to before you told me she died in a car accident." The room erupted in whispers. "I never..." Richard started, but James pulled out his phone and showed him a photo. I could see it from where I sat, an old picture of the 3 of us at a company party, back when James and I were engaged, and Richard was just another colleague. "I have excellent records, Richard," James said quietly, "including a fraudulent death certificate you filed with the county clerk's office 3 weeks before Eleanor married you." Richard's face went ashen. "That's ridiculous. I want my lawyer." "Your lawyer, Marcus Webb, is currently being questioned by the SEC," James said calmly, "along with several of your business partners. I've been investigating Sterling & Associates for 18 months, Richard. I know about the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the systematic theft from Eleanor's trust fund, all of it." I was still sitting there, frozen, watching my husband's world implode in real time. James turned back to me, and his expression softened completely. "Eleanor, I need to ask you something. Did you know about any of this?" I found my voice finally. "I found out a week ago." Something like admiration flashed across his face. "And you came anyway?" I nodded. "Of course you did," he said softly. "You were always the brave one." He held out his hand. Will you come with me? We need to talk. Privately. I looked at his hand, the same hand that had held mine 25 years ago, then at Richard's furious face, then back at James. And I took his hand and stood up. Richard grabbed my other arm. Eleanor, sit down. We're not finished here. James's voice was dangerously quiet. Touch her again, and I'll have you arrested right now instead of waiting for the SEC to finish building their case. Richard dropped my arm like it was burning him. James led me toward the door, his hand warm and steady around mine. Behind us, I could hear Victoria's panicked voice, Richard's angry demands, the chaos of executives realizing their company was collapsing. But I didn't look back. James took me to a small conference room down the hall, closed the door, and just stared at me for a long moment. I can't believe you're real, he finally said. I can't believe you're alive, I whispered. And then we were both crying, and he was holding me, and 25 years of grief and loss and stolen time came pouring out of both of us. I looked everywhere for you, James said against my hair. Your apartment, your father's office, everywhere. But you were gone. Richard told me you'd died in the same accident that supposedly killed me. He showed me a death certificate, Ellie. I mourned you for 5 years before I realized it was a lie. He told me you died too, I sobbed. He showed me the obituary, the death certificate, everything. I married him because I thought you were gone forever. He stole us from each other. James pulled back to look at me, his hands gentle on my face. He stole our entire lives. But Eleanor... His voice broke. Did he hurt you? All these years? Not physically, I said. But he made me believe I was worthless, that my opinions didn't matter, that I was nothing without him. James's jaw clenched. You were never worthless. You were brilliant and strong, and you still are. God, Ellie, I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. Someone knocked on the door. Patricia's voice called out, Eleanor, the SEC is here. They need statements from both of you. James looked at me, his eyes searching mine. Are you ready for this? It's going to get ugly. Public. Richard will fight. I thought about the woman I'd been that morning. Silent, invisible, worthless. And I thought about the woman I used to be. The woman I still was underneath all those years of being broken down. Eleanor Thornton, who closed million-dollar deals and took no prisoners. I'm ready, I said. Let's destroy him. The next 6 hours were a blur of conference rooms, federal agents, and the systematic dismantling of Richard's empire. The SEC had set up operations in Sterling and Associates' largest conference room. 4 agents, 2 forensic accountants, and a criminal prosecutor sat around a table covered in files and laptops. Patricia sat beside me, her legal pad filled with notes, her presence solid and reassuring. James sat across from us, giving his testimony with the kind of calm authority that made it clear he'd been preparing for this moment for years. Richard Mitchell approached me in April 1999, James said, his voice steady despite the emotion I knew was underneath. He told me that Eleanor Thornton had been in a severe car accident and died before reaching the hospital. He showed me a death certificate and a newspaper clipping. I was 27 years old and devastated. I never questioned it. When did you discover the truth? The lead agent asked. About 10 years later. I hired a private investigator for an unrelated matter, and on a hunch, I asked him to search for Eleanor's death records. There were none. No accident report, no hospital records, nothing. That's when I realized Richard had lied. The agent made notes. And you started searching for her. For 15 years, James confirmed. I didn't find her until 2 years ago, when I was investigating Sterling and Associates for fraud and discovered that Richard Mitchell's wife was named Eleanor. I obtained a photograph, and I knew. The agent turned to me. Mrs. Mitchell, were you aware of any of this before last week? I looked him in the eye, channeling every ounce of the businesswoman I used to be. I discovered the truth 8 days ago. Until then, I believed James had died in 1999. My husband showed me a death certificate and an obituary. I had no reason to doubt him. Can you describe what you found? I walked them through everything: the locked drawer, the forged documents, the shell companies, the systematic transfers from my trust fund. Patricia provided copies of all the photographs I'd taken, along with the recording I'd made of Richard confessing to Victoria. One of the forensic accountants looked up from his laptop. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband has moved approximately $11.7 million from your trust fund over the past 20 years. Most of it went through shell corporations before ending up in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. $11 million. My father's legacy, stolen piece by piece, while Richard convinced me I was too stupid to manage my own money. There's more, the accountant continued. Richard Mitchell and Victoria Sterling have been operating a fraudulent investment scheme through Sterling and Associates, funneling client money into personal accounts. Total estimated theft is over $40 million from various sources. The prosecutor leaned forward. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you directly. Were you involved in any of these financial transactions? No, I said firmly. Richard told me 30 years ago that he would handle all the finances because I didn't have a head for numbers. I believed him. Patricia interjected smoothly. My client has a degree in business finance from Northwestern and spent 5 years as a senior consultant in investment management at Thornton Investments. Richard Mitchell systematically undermined her confidence and competence to maintain control. Classic financial abuse pattern, the agent muttered, making more notes. Then I played them the recording from the night before. Richard's voice admitting to the planned divorce, to stealing my money, to calling me stupid. And then the part that made everyone in the room go silent. Richard's voice, tinny but clear through my phone speaker. Yeah, well, the old man had to go. He was getting suspicious about the company transfers, but a little arsenic in his morning coffee, and nature took its course. The prosecutor's head snapped up. He's admitting to murder. My father, Harold Thornton, I said quietly. He died of what doctors thought was sudden-onset cancer in 1999, 3 months after Richard told me James was dead, 3 months before Richard and I got married. Patricia slid a document across the table. We've already filed for exhumation and autopsy. The order was granted this morning. The lead agent looked at the prosecutor. We have enough for multiple felony charges: wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, racketeering, and now potentially murder. Bring him in, the prosecutor said. They brought Richard into the conference room 30 minutes later. He'd found a criminal defense attorney somewhere, an expensive-looking man with silver hair and a briefcase that probably cost more than most people's cars. But when Richard saw me sitting there with James, Patricia, and the federal agents, his face went from pale to purple. Eleanor, what have you done? He hissed. Told the truth, I said calmly. You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. You're a fraud, I replied, and a thief, and a murderer. His lawyer put a warning hand on his arm. Don't say anything, Richard. But Richard was past listening. He turned to the prosecutor, his voice desperate. Whatever she told you, it's lies. Eleanor isn't well. She's confused. She has memory problems. Mr. Mitchell, the prosecutor interrupted. We have 18 months of documented evidence, including recordings, forged documents, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Your wife's statement is corroborated by independent sources. She's trying to steal my money, Richard shouted. That trust fund is marital property. She's conspiring with Hartley to frame me. The trust fund is Eleanor Thornton's inheritance, James said coldly, which you accessed fraudulently using forged power of attorney documents. We found them all, Richard. Every single one. Richard's face went dark red. You did this. You turned her against me. If you hadn't come back... If I hadn't come back, you'd have stolen everything and disappeared with your mistress, James finished. We found the divorce papers, Richard. The ones you were planning to file next week, claiming Eleanor was mentally incompetent so you could take her assets. The room went silent. Patricia slid several documents across the table, each one landing with deliberate precision. This is an emergency injunction freezing all marital assets and personal accounts in Richard Mitchell's name, granted 2 hours ago. Another document. This is a petition for legal separation on grounds of fraud and financial abuse. Another. This is a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office for prosecution on charges including murder. And one more. This is a civil lawsuit for the return of $11.7 million plus damages and interest. Richard stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. His expensive lawyer was already flipping through them, his expression growing grimmer with each page. Your assets are frozen, Patricia continued. Your passport has been flagged. And in approximately, she checked her watch, 5 minutes, the SEC will be issuing a press release about the investigation into Sterling and Associates and its principals. You can't do this, Richard whispered. I already did, I said. The prosecutor stood. Richard Mitchell, you're being charged with wire fraud, identity theft, forgery, racketeering, and will be adding murder charges pending autopsy results. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I watched them put handcuffs on my husband of 38 years, watched him being read his rights, watched his lawyer already calculating billable hours and exit strategies. As they led Richard toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. You'll regret this, Eleanor. You're nothing without me. James stood up, his voice cutting through the room. She's Eleanor Grace Thornton. She was someone long before she met you, and she'll be someone long after you're in prison. Richard's face twisted with hate, but the agents pulled him through the door. Then they brought in Victoria. Her perfect makeup was smeared, her red dress wrinkled. She took one look at the assembled officials and started talking immediately. It was all Richard's idea, she said frantically. I didn't know about the fraud, I swear. He told me the money was his, that his wife was fine with everything. Ms. Sterling, the prosecutor interrupted, you're on record in multiple emails discussing shell company transfers and offshore accounts. Would you like to revise your statement? Victoria's mouth opened and closed. Then she turned to me, desperation making her voice shrill. Eleanor, you have to understand. Richard said you didn't care about the money. He said you were happy just being a housewife. And you believed him? I asked quietly. Or did you just not care as long as you got what you wanted? She didn't answer. They arrested Victoria too. More handcuffs, more rights being read, more lawyers being called. By 6 p.m., Sterling and Associates was empty except for James, Patricia, and me. We sat in that conference room surrounded by evidence boxes and legal documents, and I finally let myself breathe. What happens now? I asked. Now we rebuild your life, Patricia said. We'll recover most of your money. The offshore accounts are already frozen. The divorce will be finalized within 6 months. Richard is looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison, possibly more if the murder charge sticks. And Sterling and Associates? Will be liquidated, James said. Legitimate clients will be made whole. The corrupt ones will face their own investigations. It's over, Ellie. I looked at him, this man who'd spent 25 years searching for me, who'd built a company to fight corruption, who'd never stopped loving me despite everything. What about us? I whispered. James reached across the table and took my hand. That's up to you. I don't want to pressure you, Ellie. You've been controlled for 38 years. You need time to figure out who you are now, what you want. I know who I am, I said. I'm Eleanor Thornton, and I know what I want. His eyes searched mine. What's that? To stop wasting time, I said simply. We've lost 25 years, James. I'm not losing another day. Have you ever gotten the chance to reclaim everything that was stolen from you? Have you ever stood at the moment where your old life ends and your real life finally begins? I was about to face Richard one last time, and this time, I wasn't going to be silent. Richard's arraignment was scheduled for Thursday morning, 2 days after his arrest. Patricia told me I didn't have to go, that I could wait until the trial. But I needed to be there. I needed to look him in the eye one more time and show him that I wasn't his worthless, silent wife anymore. James drove me to the courthouse. He'd barely left my side since Tuesday, but he was careful, respectful of my space, never pushing. We'd spent hours talking, filling in 25 years of missing history. He told me about building his company, about the years of searching for me, about the relationships he'd tried to have but could never fully commit to because part of him had never stopped loving me. And I told him about the slow death of becoming Eleanor Mitchell, how Richard had isolated me from every friend, every colleague, every piece of my old identity, how he'd convinced me that my father had wanted him to take care of me, when really Daddy had been dying of poisoning, slow, deliberate poisoning that we could now prove Richard had administered. I should have been devastated, but I was past devastation. I was in the clear, cold space of righteous fury. The courthouse was packed with reporters. Sterling and Associates' collapse was national news, $40 million in fraud, executives arrested, clients suing. But the story that had captured everyone's attention was mine and James's. Star-crossed lovers reunited after husband fakes death, the headlines read. Billionaire spent 25 years searching for lost love. It should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt like validation. Like the world was finally seeing what Richard had tried to hide for decades. We walked through the crowd of cameras and microphones, James's arm protective around my shoulders. Inside the courtroom, Richard was already there in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. He'd aged a decade in 2 days. His face was gray, his shoulders slumped, all his corporate polish stripped away. His new lawyer stood when we entered. Your Honor, my client requests that Mrs. Mitchell be barred from the courtroom. Her presence is prejudicial. Denied, the judge said curtly. Mrs. Mitchell is the primary victim in this case. She has every right to be here. I sat in the front row, James on one side, Patricia on the other, and I stared at Richard until he was forced to look at me. The prosecutor laid out the charges methodically. 17 counts of wire fraud, 8 counts of identity theft, 5 counts of forgery, conspiracy to commit racketeering, and the new one, attempted murder in the death of Harold Thornton. Richard's head snapped up at that last one. What? I never tried to kill anyone. You poisoned Harold Thornton over a 6-month period in 1999, the prosecutor said calmly. Arsenic administered in his daily medication. The exhumation was completed yesterday, and preliminary toxicology confirms lethal levels of arsenic in the tissue samples. I watched the blood drain from Richard's face. They'd found it. The proof was there, in my father's bones. Richard's lawyer argued for bail, $2 million, house arrest, ankle monitor. Patricia stood up and systematically destroyed every argument with the precision of a surgeon. Your Honor, Richard Mitchell has $11 million in offshore accounts, she said. He has a forged passport that was discovered in his office safe. He was planning to flee to the Cayman Islands within the week. He has no ties to the community strong enough to ensure his appearance. Bail should be denied. The judge took less than a minute to decide. Bail is denied. The defendant will remain in custody pending trial. Richard erupted. You can't do this. Eleanor, tell them you're lying. The bailiffs moved toward him, but I stood up. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge looked surprised, but nodded. I walked to the barrier separating the gallery from the defendant's table. I looked down at Richard, this man who'd stolen 38 years of my life, who'd murdered my father, who'd faked my fiancé's death so he could marry me and steal my inheritance. I'm not lying, I said, and my voice was steady and clear. You told me my opinions were worthless. You told me I was stupid, forgettable, nothing without you. You made me believe it for so long that I almost forgot who I was before you. Richard's eyes were wild. "Eleanor, please." "But I remember now," I continued. "I remember that I was Eleanor Thornton, and I was brilliant. I remember that I was engaged to a man who loved me, and you murdered that future. I remember that my father was healthy until you started making his coffee every morning. I remember signing papers I didn't understand because I was drowning in grief that you caused." "You can't prove any of this," Richard shouted. "I already did," I said quietly. "I have recordings of you confessing to Victoria. I have documents showing every fraudulent transfer. I have testimony from forensic accountants, private investigators, and federal agents. I have 25 years of James Hartley's search records proving you lied about his death. And now I have my father's autopsy showing exactly how you killed him." Richard's face had gone from red to white. His lawyer was frantically whispering to him, but he shook him off. "I gave you everything," Richard yelled. "A home, a life, status. You were nothing before me." "I was everything before you," I said, "and you systematically destroyed it all because you wanted my father's money. You saw a grieving young woman, and you saw an opportunity. You murdered the man I loved, murdered my father, and spent 38 years making me believe I was worthless so I'd never question what you were doing." "Your Honor," Richard's lawyer tried to intervene, but I wasn't finished. "You know what the saddest part is, Richard? If you'd just asked for a divorce 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I probably would have let you have half of everything. I was so broken by then, I would have been grateful for the escape. But you couldn't even give me that dignity. You had to plan to have me declared incompetent, to take everything, to leave me with nothing." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "You made one mistake," I said softly. "You underestimated me. You thought I was too broken to fight back. But you didn't break me, Richard. You just buried me, and I clawed my way back out." I turned to walk back to my seat, but Richard lunged forward as far as his shackles would allow. "You'll regret this. You're nothing. You hear me? Nothing." James stood up, his voice cutting through Richard's shouts. "The only nothing in this room is you. Eleanor has more strength in her little finger than you've had in your entire miserable life. And she's going to stand in this courtroom at your sentencing and watch you get exactly what you deserve." 2 bailiffs pulled Richard back. He was still shouting as they dragged him toward the door, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "You'll never survive without me. You need me." "I needed James," I said, and Richard froze. "I needed my father. I needed the life you stole from me. But you? I never needed you at all." They dragged him out. The last thing I saw was his face, pale and twisted and finally afraid. The judge adjourned, and the courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters were shouting questions. Richard's lawyer was conferring with the prosecutor. But I just stood there, breathing, feeling lighter than I had in decades. Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. "That was perfect." "It needed to be said," I replied. James took my hand. "Come on, let's get out of here." We went back to the penthouse, my penthouse now, legally. Richard's name had been removed from the deed that morning. Patricia had arranged for all his belongings to be removed and placed in storage. Walking in, the space felt different. Empty of his presence, it was just rooms. Expensive, beautiful rooms that I could finally make my own. Or sell. I hadn't decided yet. James and Patricia sat with me in the living room while I went through the last of Richard's office. We'd already given everything relevant to the authorities, but I wanted to see if there was anything else hidden, any more lies waiting to be uncovered. At the back of his bottom drawer, I found a locked box. Small, metal, the kind you'd buy at an office supply store. I pried it open with a letter opener. Inside was a journal. "What is it?" James asked. I opened it and started reading. My hands began to shake. It was Richard's handwriting, dated entries going back 40 years. Planning. Scheming. Every step of his long game laid out in meticulous detail. "Listen to this," I said, my voice hollow. April 1st, 1988. Identified target, Eleanor Thornton. Father owns investment firm worth 20 maports plus. Daughter is soft, trusting. Boyfriend James Hartley is a problem, but can be managed. Patricia's eyes widened. He was planning this from the beginning. I kept reading. April 15th, 1999. Told Hartley that Eleanor died. He believed it. Funeral arranged with paid actors. He won't look for her now. Phase 1 complete. My God, James whispered. May 3, 1999. Began arsenic treatment on Harold Thornton. Small doses in his coffee. Doctors suspect cancer. Eleanor is devastated. Perfect state for manipulation. I was crying now, but I kept reading. August 12th, 1999. Married Eleanor today. She signed prenup without reading. Too distraught about her father. Smart move setting it up so I get control of trust fund. Phase 2 complete. Entry after entry. Year after year. His satisfaction at managing me. His pleasure at watching me shrink. His plans with Victoria. His schemes to drain every last penny. The final entry was dated a week ago. Board meeting Tuesday. Will be difficult with Hartley taking over, but Eleanor is so beaten down she won't cause problems. Once acquisition finalizes, initiate divorce proceedings. Victoria and I leave for Caymans. After 38 years of investment, payout comes due. I closed the journal and looked at James and Patricia. He documented everything, his own confession, written in his own hand. That's going to the prosecutor, Patricia said firmly. This is additional evidence of premeditation going back 4 decades. He was proud of it, I said softly. He thought he was so clever, destroying my life piece by piece. He even kept score. James moved to sit beside me, his arm around my shoulders. He was a predator who found a vulnerable target. But Ellie, you survived. More than that, you fought back. You won. It doesn't feel like winning, I admitted. It feels like mourning. Mourning all the years I lost, all the things I could have done, the life I should have had. Then mourn, Patricia said gently. But also celebrate. You got out. You exposed him. You're free. That evening, after Patricia left, James and I sat on the balcony overlooking the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful, and for the first time in decades, I let myself appreciate it without worrying about what Richard would criticize. "What are you going to do now?" James asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Sell this place probably. Too many bad memories. Maybe buy something smaller. Start working again." Patricia said I could consult for her firm if I wanted. "What about us?" His voice was careful, not pushing. I turned to look at him. At 52, he was still the man I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Older, yes, marked by time and loss and searching. But his eyes were the same, kind and intelligent, and looking at me like I mattered. "I love you," I said simply. "I never stopped loving you, not for a single day of the last 25 years. But James, I need time. I need to figure out who Eleanor is when she's not being controlled or broken down. I need to remember how to be a whole person on my own." He nodded slowly. "I understand, and I'll wait. I've waited 25 years. I can wait a little longer for you to find yourself again." "What if I'm not the same person you remember?" I asked. "I'm 67, James. I'm damaged and complicated, and I don't know if I can ever be that girl you fell in love with." "I don't want that girl," he said. "I want you, the woman who spent 8 days gathering evidence against her abuser, the woman who walked into that boardroom knowing she was about to blow up her entire life, the woman who stood in a courtroom and faced down the man who tried to destroy her. That's who I'm in love with, Ellie, the Eleanor you are right now." I started crying again. Seemed like that's all I did these days, and he held me while the sun finished setting and the city lights began to glow below us. "Take all the time you need," James said against my hair. "I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in 38 years, I believed someone when they said they'd stay. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my new townhouse by Lake Michigan, watching the sunrise paint the water gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The space was smaller than the penthouse, half the size actually, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture I'd chosen myself. Every color on the walls reflected my taste, not Richard's control. I was drinking coffee from a mug James had given me, simple white ceramic with Eleanor Thornton, CEO, printed on it. A joke, but also not a joke. Because 2 weeks ago, I'd officially reopened Thornton Investments with Patricia as my partner. We had 5 clients already, all of them referred by James, all of them legitimate businesses looking for honest financial consulting. I was working again, using my brain again, being Eleanor Thornton again. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected. Richard's journal, that meticulous documentation of his crimes, had made the prosecutor's job almost too easy. He'd pled guilty to everything in exchange for a sentence recommendation of 25 years instead of life. The judge had given him 30 years in federal prison. He'd be 94 when he got out, if he lived that long. The forensic autopsy on Daddy's remains had confirmed arsenic poisoning. The prosecutors had built a timeline showing Richard's purchases of arsenic-based rat poison, matched to the dates when Daddy's cancer symptoms had worsened. It was premeditated murder, plain and simple. Victoria had taken a plea deal too, 10 years for fraud and conspiracy. She'd tried to play the victim, claimed Richard had manipulated her, but her emails told a different story. She'd known everything, profited from everything, and been planning to run away with him when it all fell apart. The divorce had been finalized last month. I'd gotten everything: the penthouse, which I'd immediately sold, my entire trust fund plus the money Richard had stolen, damages, and Richard's share of Sterling and Associates' legitimate assets. The total came to nearly $18 million, more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Money I planned to use wisely, investing in women's shelters and financial literacy programs for abuse survivors. Marcus Webb, Richard's lawyer, had gotten 15 years. 3 other partners at Sterling and Associates had been indicted. The company itself had been dissolved, its legitimate clients transferred to other firms, its fraudulent schemes exposed and prosecuted. It was over, really, truly over. I heard footsteps behind me and smiled before turning around. James had stayed over last night, not in my bed, not yet, but in the guest room. We were taking things slow, relearning each other, building something real instead of rushing to reclaim what had been stolen. "Morning," he said, kissing my cheek. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," I admitted. "Today's the day." Today, I was meeting with a group of women from a domestic abuse survivors support group. Patricia had arranged it. They wanted to hear my story, to know that escape and recovery were possible. "Nervous?" James asked. "Terrified," I said honestly. What if I can't help them? What if my story just makes them feel worse? Your story shows them that even after decades of abuse, even when you think you're too old or too broken or too late, you can still fight back. You can still win. He put his arm around me. "That's powerful, Ellie." At 10 a.m., I walked into a community center conference room where 15 women sat waiting. They ranged in age from late 50s to mid-70s. Some looked defeated, some looked angry. All of them looked at me with a mixture of hope and skepticism. I took a deep breath and began. "My name is Eleanor Thornton. I'm 67 years old. 3 months ago, I was Eleanor Mitchell, the invisible wife of a man who'd spent 38 years destroying me. Today, I'm free." I told them everything. About Richard's manipulation, about losing myself piece by piece, about believing I was worthless, about finding evidence and choosing to fight instead of accepting my fate, about standing in a courtroom and reclaiming my voice. When I finished, a woman in the back raised her hand. "How did you find the courage?" "I'm 71. I've been married for 45 years. I don't know who I am without him anymore." "I found the courage by getting angry," I said honestly. Really deeply angry at what had been stolen from me, And then I found help, a good lawyer, a supportive friend, evidence that couldn't be denied. You don't have to do this alone. You shouldn't do it alone. Another woman spoke up. But what if we're too old? What if there's nothing left to salvage? I looked at her, at all of them, and felt tears prick my eyes. I spent 38 years being told I was worthless. I believed it. But here's what I learned. They made us believe we were too old, too stupid, too damaged to matter. That's how they kept control. But it was always a lie. I'm 67, I continued. I just started a new business. I'm relearning who I am. I'm building a relationship with a man who actually loves and respects me. Is it scary? Absolutely. Do I have moments where I doubt myself? Every single day. But I'm living my life now, finally, and you can too. We talked for 2 hours. I gave them Patricia's contact information, resources for legal help, numbers for financial advisors who specialized in abuse cases. But mostly, I just listened to their stories and told them over and over, you matter. Your life matters. It's not too late. When I left that community center, James was waiting in the parking lot. How'd it go? I think I helped, I said. Or at least I hope I did. You did, he assured me, just by showing them it's possible. That evening, James and I had dinner at a little Italian restaurant in our neighborhood. Nothing fancy, just good food and quiet conversation. Over tiramisu, he reached across the table and took my hand. I have a question for you, he said. My heart jumped. Okay. I'm not proposing, he said quickly, reading my expression. We're not there yet, and that's fine. But I want to know what you're thinking about us, about the future. I looked at our joined hands, his fingers interlaced with mine, the touch easy and comfortable and right. I'm thinking that I spent 25 years believing you were dead and 38 years being convinced I was worthless. And I'm thinking I don't want to waste another day. What does that mean? It means I want to build something real with you, slowly. No rushing, no trying to make up for lost time, just building something honest and good. Can we do that? He smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. We can do that. I'm broken in some ways, I warned him. There are still moments when I hear Richard's voice in my head telling me I'm stupid. There are still nights when I wake up afraid. I'm working with a therapist, but it's going to take time. I have time, James said. And for the record, you're not broken. You're healing. There's a difference. If you're watching this and you're in a situation like I was, whether you're 60 or 70 or 80, I want you to know something. It's not too late. It's never too late to reclaim your life, your dignity, your worth. I'm 67 years old, and I'm just beginning. I'm running a business. I'm helping other women. I'm building a life I actually want to live. The man who tried to destroy me is in prison where he belongs. And I'm free. You can be free too. If you've been inspired by this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from, or share your own story of survival and recovery. You never know who needs to hear it. And if you're in an abusive situation right now, please reach out for help. Talk to a lawyer, a counselor, a trusted friend. Document everything. Build your case. And when you're ready, fight back. You deserve better. You deserve respect. You deserve a life where your opinions matter and your voice is heard. I'm Eleanor Thornton. I survived, and so can you. Thank you for listening to my story.